Hello and welcome to my presentation on the fall of classical empires throughout history. So we're going to be talking about the Han Dynasty, the Gupta Empire, and the Roman Empire. So let's begin. First, we have the Han Dynasty, and there are a lot of variables that caused the collapse of the Han Dynasty. One of them being Confucian intellectual activity decreasing. So people were no longer thinking of how they could use Confucianism to expand their power and cause a more functional government in their society. The government lost its power. They couldn't control what people did and didn't do. They were basically looked down on, and no one took them serious. Bureaucrats became more corrupt, so they weren't thinking about the empire as a whole. They were just thinking about themselves and making money and making their lives better. And free peasants were placed under high taxes that tied them to their land. So they couldn't really do much with their land without having to pay very high taxes, which basically means you can't sell off the land or make a profit or anything like that. It was very hard for middle class and lower class to make any progress. And just general dysfunction, really, that caused the entire dynasty to just collapse on itself. Moving on to the Gupta. The ability of the Gupta emperors to control local princes was declining. The emperors themselves couldn't control what their people did and what their princes themselves did, because the princes that would rule their own little part of the empire, they would just be doing their entire different thing, despite what the emperor says, and the prince wouldn't listen to the emperor, and it was just pure chaos. And invasion from nomadic people outside of India, in particular, they were constantly pushing, trying to get into the empire. They finally broke through, and the ultimate downfall of the Gupta Empire was caused by nomadic invaders that destroyed the entire empire. Finally, we have the Roman Empire. There's a lot of variables. I'm just going to sum it up here with the most important ones. There were difficulties in recruiting an effective army. Because Rome was so massive, they needed an army, a very powerful army, to hold off invaders and keep the people in control. And at this time, they couldn't get a good army going and a good powerful momentum that they needed to keep the empire functional. Politicians were corrupt and cruel. They were focused on themselves, not the empire as a whole. They would just not do the right thing for the empire. And tax collection became difficult when the empire fell in hard times. Economy was going down due to a lack of trade. That was also a big factor that I didn't write down here. Trade was declining, so people weren't making as much money, and they couldn't pay the taxes, so the government wouldn't get money. So basically it was sending everyone down into a bankruptcy, basically. And then finally we have Germanic invaders that invaded and destroyed the capital of Rome in 476 CE. That was the final blow, because they didn't have an army to defend them, because they didn't have the money to raise it up, and they couldn't find the good people. So it was very easy for Germanic invaders to just waltz on in and say, hey, let's take your capital. Okay, boom, destroyed. All of Rome gone. So, how are they all similar? A factor in each one of these collapses involved invasions from nomadic tribes outside of the empire. In Rome was Germany, and it was Germanic tribes, and the Gupta was nomadic tribes from outside, etc., etc. A bad economy. Economy is everything in an empire. You can't have a normal functioning society without a normal economy and a functioning, good, flourishing economy. So without that, that's the pure concrete of the society. If you don't have that, you're not going to get anywhere. And finally, we have corruption of politicians. Very, very, very important that your politicians are doing the right thing and serving the people. And in these societies, they weren't doing that, and it caused a lot of turmoil. So how is each one of these collapses unique? Rome was unique because they were the only ones that needed an army. The Guptas and the Han Dynasty, they could have benefited from an army, like for instance with the Gupta, because they were being pushed in by nomadic invaders, but they weren't dependent on it, such as Rome. Rome needed it if they wanted to keep their empire under control. The collapse of the Gupta was unique because it was the only empire whose emperors couldn't control their own princes. So it's like the government couldn't control themselves, basically. That's what it comes down to. It's a weird way of saying it, but that's how it went. Very strange way of causing a collapse. And then finally, the collapse of the Han was unique because it was caused by a lack of intellectual activity. The people weren't embracing critical thinking in order to think about how their emperor or empire could be stronger and more effective. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed, and peace out.